Snow had been falling for 5 straight days in the mountains of Cedar Ridge, covering the forests and peaks in a silence so heavy it almost hurt to breathe. The long road leading to the Harrington estate was nearly hidden beneath the snow, winding upward through the storm. No one came up here when the weather was like this. No one, except her. Naomi Brooks, stood at the front gates of the estate, her fingers numb inside thin gloves she had borrowed from the shelter. Her boots were soaked through, the icy water seeping into her socks. Every breath she took left a trembling cloud in the frozen air. She had walked the final 3 miles uphill after the bus could go no farther. All for a job she wasn't even certain existed. The gate creaked open after what felt like a long minute. A man appeared through the curtain of falling snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black wool coat that looked as if it was made for him. The coat was perfect, despite the storm, just like the man wearing it. His face was striking, his jawline sharp, his dark brown eyes almost black, colder than the snow beneath Naomi's feet. His expression carried no warmth, no curiosity, only judgment. "You're lost," he said. His voice was deep, steady, each word cutting through the air. Naomi tightened her grip on the folder she held close to her chest. "I'm here for the housekeeper position," Mrs. Callahan said. "I don't need a maid." His interruption was swift, his voice giving nothing away. She hesitated, the rejection stinging in her chest, but she steadied her voice. "Please, just an interview. I walked here. I came all the way from Fairview." He glanced at the road behind her, as though weighing the effort it would take to shut the gate in her face. "You walked through that blizzard?" "I couldn't afford a cab," she admitted. Her voice shook, but not from fear. Her body was stiff from the cold. His jaw tightened. "How old are you?" 21. His eyes narrowed. "Let me guess, no experience, no references. You look like you walked out of a storybook and ended up at the wrong castle." She met his gaze without flinching. "I know how to clean. I can cook a little. I don't steal. I don't lie." He studied her in silence, his eyes lingering a moment longer than they should have. "And you're innocent, I assume?" The question startled her. "What does that matter?" "It matters to people like me," he said calmly. "People with reputations, people with vulnerabilities." Naomi took a breath that burned her lungs with cold. "I'm not here to ruin you. I just want to survive." Something flickered in his eyes for a fraction of a second. It could have been recognition. It could have been pity. But it disappeared almost instantly. "I don't hire live-in staff anymore," he said. "Especially not ones who look like they still believe in magic." "I don't believe in magic," she replied softly. "But I believe in work. And I'm not leaving until you give me a chance." The silence between them stretched, heavy and cold. Then, without another word, he stepped aside and gestured toward the snow-covered path. "1 week, that's all. You get?" Naomi nodded, blinking the snow from her lashes. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't answer. He simply turned and started walking toward the massive stone mansion that rose behind him, half buried in snow. She followed, her legs shaking, though she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the strange weight of his presence pressing against her chest. The heavy doors closed behind them, shutting out the storm. The warmth inside the mansion wrapped around her like fire, but his voice still echoed in her head. He said he didn't need a maid. He was wrong. And deep inside her, Naomi knew it was only a matter of time before he realized it. The Harrington estate was nothing like Naomi had pictured. It wasn't the cold, modern glass and steel kind of place she had seen in magazines about billionaires. It was built of old grey stone, the kind that had survived decades of storms. The oak doors were heavy, the kind you had to push with both hands. Fireplaces glowed with real flames, and the scent of pine and wood smoke clung to the air. It felt alive in its silence. The kind of house that had witnessed things and never spoken of them. Naomi followed the man silently through the grand hall, her boots making faint squeaks against the polished wooden floors. The shift from the freezing storm to the heat inside was almost overwhelming. Her cheeks tingled, and the numbness in her hands began to fade. He walked ahead of her, not looking back, his stride long and precise. His presence was like gravity, inescapable and impossible to ignore. "You'll stay in the East Wing," he said finally, his deep voice carrying through the stillness. He turned slightly, his dark eyes catching hers for a moment. "It's far from the main rooms. I like my privacy." Naomi nodded. "I won't bother you." "Mrs. Callahan left instructions," he continued. "You're to clean the first floor. My study and bedroom are off limits. Meals are served at 7. Breakfast and dinner. I handle lunch myself." Naomi tried to remember every word, knowing she couldn't afford even the smallest mistake. "The kitchen is yours after hours," he added, "but no noise after 9. Understood?" "Yes," Naomi replied quietly. "If you get sick, I won't take care of you." She blinked at the bluntness of his words, but kept her voice steady. "Understood." He looked at her again as if waiting for her to break under the weight of his rules, but she didn't flinch. Her shoulders stayed straight, her eyes calm. "Don't expect me to remember your name. I don't do well with attachments." "Noted," Naomi said softly, though she had already memorized his. Julian Harrington. The name everyone in Cedar Ridge knew, even if they had never seen him. The papers called him a financial genius. A man who had built one of the most successful investment companies in the country before disappearing from public life. Brilliant, untouchable, cold. The rumors said. His fiancée had betrayed him just days before their wedding, selling confidential company information to a rival firm. After that, he had walked away from the world, retreating into his mountain estate like a shadow. And now, Naomi Brooks, a woman with no degree, no family, no connections, was here in his home. Her room in the East Wing was small but warm. The bed was soft, the window opened to a view of the snow-covered forest, and the air smelled faintly of cedar. She sat on the edge of the mattress and clutched her worn bag, the only thing she owned. Inside were 3 shirts, a paperback novel she had read a dozen times, and a letter from the shelter's director. "You are capable of light." Naomi, even in the coldest places, her fingers trembled as she set the letter aside. It wasn't fear. It was something else, an unshakable feeling that this place, this job, this man, none of it was an accident. Naomi woke before dawn the next morning. The house was still wrapped in the kind of quiet that made every sound feel like it didn't belong. She moved softly through the halls, her steps light against the polished floors. She began in the kitchen, scrubbing the counters until they gleamed. She dusted the grand piano in the music room, careful with every key, and spent hours in the library, organizing books by size and color, even though no one had asked her to. By the time the morning light touched the windows, she still hadn't seen Julian. It wasn't until breakfast that he appeared. He stood at the head of the long dining table, a newspaper in one hand, a cup of untouched black coffee in front of him. His shirt was crisp, the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing a sleek silver watch and a thin scar along the side of his wrist. He didn't look at her when she walked in. Naomi moved quietly, pouring his coffee, setting his breakfast down with care, then stepping back. His eyes flicked up for the briefest moment, meeting hers before returning to the paper. "The eggs are overcooked," he said, without expression. "Do better tomorrow," she replied evenly. He didn't respond, but he finished every bite on his plate. Over the next few days, Naomi began to understand the rhythm of the estate. Julian rose at 6 every morning and spent long hours in his study. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were precise and deliberate. Sometimes he left her notes short, direct instructions on the kitchen counter. She never asked questions. She kept to her work, moving quietly and respectfully, but she observed. She noticed the way he paused at the window when snow began to fall. She noticed the way his hand lingered on the edge of the piano, though she never once heard him play. She noticed how his shoulders stiffened when the phone rang, his tone sharper during certain calls. Julian Harrington was a man who lived in silence. But Naomi began to hear it. It wasn't empty. It was full of things he never said, and without meaning to. She started listening. One evening, Naomi was placing a tray of tea by the fireplace in the sitting room, when Julian spoke without warning. You don't belong here." The words were calm, but heavy. Naomi froze for a moment, unsure if it was meant as a warning or simply an observation. She looked at him, her voice steady. "Maybe not, but neither do you." His dark eyes narrowed slightly at her answer, but he didn't respond. Naomi turned and walked away, her heart beating harder than she wanted to admit. She should have stayed quiet. She should have been careful. But there was something in her that refused to shrink back, because for the first time in her life, the cold around her didn't feel like it wanted to destroy her, felt like it was testing her. Days passed, and she learned the estate like it was alive. She noticed how the floors in the east hallway creaked when the wind blew, how the chandelier in the foyer gave the faintest flicker when the main fireplace was lit. She noticed how Julian always took his coffee black, how his shoes were lined perfectly by the front mat every evening, and how he still never once addressed her by name. But she also noticed something else. Julian began appearing more often in places she didn't expect. Standing by the piano with documents in hand while she dusted nearby. Stepping into the kitchen for a glass of water, only to linger a little longer than necessary. Pausing in the doorway of the study, watching her reflection in the glass of the window as she arranged fresh flowers. It was subtle, unspoken, but it was there. Something was shifting, slow and quiet, but undeniable. The storm outside had been growing worse all evening. By nightfall, the wind howled against the stone walls of the estate, rattling the windows. Naomi sat in her room in the east wing, reading by the soft light of a lamp. When the power flickered once, then again. Before the lights went out completely, the sudden darkness wrapped around her. The wind outside roared louder, and for a moment, she sat still. Listening to the house settle into silence, she picked up a small flashlight from her nightstand and stepped into the hallway. Her footsteps were quiet as she made her way through the long corridor, guided only by the beam of light and the faint glow of the fireplace in the distance. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for until she found herself standing outside the door of Julian's study. The door was open. Inside, the room was lit only by the fire and a single candle on the desk. Julian stood near the flames, the shadows casting sharp lines across his face. "The generator should come back on soon," he said without turning. Naomi stepped into the room. "I'm not afraid of the dark." "You should be," he replied, his voice low. Her eyes stayed on him. "You're always afraid of things that don't touch you." He turned then, his gaze sharp. "And you're not." "I've already been touched by worse than darkness," she said quietly. He stared at her, his eyes unreadable, before taking a step toward her. "Naomi." It was the first time he had said her name. Her breath caught. It sounded different in his voice, dangerous. "Forbidden." "Yes," she answered softly. "Go back to bed." His voice was steady, but there was the faintest waver in it. She should have turned, she should have left, but she didn't move. Julian stopped just inches from her. She could feel the warmth radiating from him. The storm outside now, nothing compared to the storm between them. His eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" he asked. Standing still, she whispered. "Everyone runs eventually," he said quietly. "I won't." His hand rose slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The touch sent a shiver down her spine, her knees trembling at the electricity of it. Then suddenly, he stepped back, as if the moment had burned him. "Good night, Naomi." She stood there for a full minute after he left, her breathing uneven, her heart pounding. The next morning, Julian was gone. No note, no explanation. Naomi felt the absence of his presence in the house like a weight. The silence heavier than usual. She kept herself busy, moving from room to room with her usual quiet efficiency, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the moment in his study, the way he had spoken her name, the way he had stepped back as if being close to her was dangerous. He didn't appear during breakfast. He didn't appear at lunch. By evening, the worry in her chest was sharp enough that she found herself hesitating outside his study. She knocked once. No answer. She pushed the door open. The room was empty, but his laptop was still open on the desk. A leather folder sat beside it. She didn't mean to look. She only meant to tidy the space. But a slip of paper fell from the folder and landed on the floor. As she bent to pick it up, she caught sight of a photograph clipped to a page. A woman's face stared back at her, elegant and cold, with headlines printed beneath. Scandal, betrayal, Camille Pierce leaks Harrington Holdings. Data to rival firm. Naomi's hands trembled as she carefully set the paper back in place. So it was true. The rumors weren't just stories, they were public humiliation. She closed the folder and stepped back, her chest tight. That night, Julian returned. It was after 10 when she heard the door open. He walked into the kitchen, snow still clinging to his coat. "You read the file," he said. "It wasn't a question." Naomi froze. "Only what fell out?" He dropped his coat on a chair, his eyes on her. "That woman almost destroyed me. Not because of the money, because I believed her, because I thought she saw me, and I don't forgive myself for being wrong." "You were human," Naomi said gently. "No one's immune to love." He stepped closer. "I don't love. I didn't say you did," she replied, her voice soft. "But I'm starting to feel something I can't explain, and that's more dangerous." He stared at her, silent for a long moment. "You're not afraid of me," he said finally. "I'm afraid of losing something I never really had," she answered. Her voice cracked slightly. "Because when you look at me, I feel seen. Not pitied, not judged, just alive." His jaw tightened. "You're too good. I'm just real," she whispered, "and I'm still here." That night, they didn't touch, but they sat across from each other by the fire. For the first time, Julian spoke about his mother, who had passed when he was 19. About the pressure of wealth. About a world where no one said what they meant. Naomi listened. She never looked away from him. Somewhere in that quiet conversation, something between them shifted. The next day started like any other. Naomi was in the kitchen preparing tea when the doorbell rang. It was unusual. No one ever visited the Harrington estate, especially not unannounced. She wiped her hands and made her way to the door. When she opened it, a woman stood on the front step. She wore high heels that made no sense in the snow and a red coat that clung to her like it had been designed for a fashion shoot, not a storm. Her lipstick was dark, bold, and perfect. "I'm looking for Julian," she said without so much as a hello. Naomi blinked, unsure what to say. "He's not available." The woman stepped inside without invitation. "Tell him Camille's here." Naomi's stomach dropped. It was her. The woman from the file. Camille Pierce. The woman who had nearly destroyed him. Julian appeared moments later, his face unreadable, his tone sharp. "You shouldn't be here. You wouldn't return my calls," she said smoothly. "So I came." Naomi stepped back, unsure whether to leave the room, but Camille's eyes locked onto her like a target. "This her?" Camille asked. "Your new little pet." Julian's voice dropped a level. "Leave her out of this." "You're repeating patterns," Camille said, folding her arms. "First, me, now the virgin maid. What is it with you and broken girls?" "You need to go," Julian said, his voice cold. Now, but Naomi had heard enough. She turned without a word and walked out of the room. Her steps echoed through the hall, but she didn't stop until she was outside. The snow crunched under her boots as she pushed past the tree line. She sat on a low log, her chest tight, her throat burning. She hadn't even realized she was crying until her vision blurred. She didn't know exactly what she and Julian had. She just knew it had felt real until now. And suddenly, it felt fragile, conditional. Like she was nothing more than another mistake in a long line of regrets. Minutes passed. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Julian appeared through the trees. His breath visible in the cold, his coat half-zipped, his face raw. "She was lying," he said. "About what?" Naomi asked. "About me, about all of it. It doesn't matter," she said before he could answer. "I shouldn't have been here in the first place." "Don't say that," he said, his voice tight. "You hired me out of pity." "No," he said. "I hired you out of curiosity. But I kept you out of need." She looked at him, eyes red. "Do you think I'm broken?" "No," he said. "I think you're the only real thing I've touched in years." Naomi stood slowly, her breath shaky. "I can't compete with your past." "You don't have to." "Then why did you flinch when she called me the Virgin Maid? Like it was something to be ashamed of." "Because she made it sound like you were less," he said. "But I know you're more." The silence between them deepened. Julian stepped forward slowly and reached for her hand. She let him. "You scare me," he said again. "Because you make me hope." "Then stop hoping," she whispered. "Start believing." He pulled her into his arms, not to kiss her, not yet, just to hold her. For the first time, she leaned in completely. She felt the beat of his heart, quick and uncertain beneath her hands. The past wasn't gone, but it no longer stood between them. The days that followed felt different. The snow outside still fell heavy, and the halls of the Harrington estate were still wrapped in silence, but something had shifted. Naomi no longer moved through the house like an invisible guest. Julian no longer avoided her presence. A quiet rhythm formed between them. He started taking his breakfast in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room. She would already be there, her sleeves rolled back as she hummed softly to herself while cooking. He never commented on the humming, but he always seemed to walk in just in time to hear it. One morning, Naomi was standing on her tiptoes, reaching for a jar on the top shelf of the cupboard. Her fingers brushed the glass but couldn't quite grip it. Julian stepped behind her without a word. One arm slid gently around her waist, steadying her, while the other reached easily for the jar above her head. Naomi froze. So did he. The jar stayed suspended in his hand, caught between them like a fragile truth. "You should keep a stool nearby," he murmured. "Or maybe you should stop putting everything so high up," she replied softly, her voice low. He set the jar down slowly, but his hand didn't leave her waist. His fingers brushed the hem of her sweater. Sending a rush of warmth through her, she turned toward him, her breath shallow, her eyes wide. "Julian," she whispered. His gaze lowered to her lips, then returned to her eyes. "Say stop," he said quietly. "If you don't want this, say it now." Naomi didn't speak. She didn't pull away. Instead, her trembling fingers lifted, brushing the edge of his jaw. That was all he needed. His mouth found hers in a kiss. That wasn't soft or tentative, it was urgent, heated. As though held back for far too long, her hands moved into his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, his restraint fraying with every passing second. Her back pressed against the counter, his hands at her waist, and then sliding higher beneath her sweater, exploring her skin with both reverence and hunger. "Tell me this isn't madness," he murmured against her lips. "It is," she said, gasping softly. "But it's ours." He lifted her onto the counter effortlessly, his lips never leaving hers. She instinctively wrapped her legs around him, her heartbeat racing. "You're sure?" he whispered. "Yes," she breathed. "I've never been more sure of anything." What followed wasn't chaos, it was surrender. They moved together like people who had waited too long, denied too much, wanted too deeply. Every touch felt new yet achingly familiar, as though it had been written into them long before this moment. When it was over, Naomi rested against his chest, her body trembling, her thoughts spinning. Julian's hand slid gently through her hair, his touch careful, almost protective. "I never meant for this to happen," he said quietly. "Neither did I," she whispered. "But I'm glad it did. I don't want to break you." "You didn't," she said softly. "I might." "Then break me gently," she answered. His lips brushed her forehead. "No, I'll build you back stronger." That night, Naomi didn't return to her room in the East Wing. She stayed in his bed, beneath the thick blankets, surrounded by the scent of pine and skin. And in the dark, he whispered things he had never said aloud. "I've been numb for years," he said quietly. "I stopped feeling anything. Until you. I used to believe I was invisible," she whispered. "Until you saw me." The storm outside was still raging, but inside the walls of the estate, Something entirely different was burning. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the room. Naomi woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. She answered, quietly. Hello. A woman's voice came through the line, anxious and hurried. Naomi Brooks, this is Mrs. Carter, director of the Fairview shelter. I'm sorry to call so early, but someone from the press has been asking questions about you, about your time at the shelter. Something about a billionaire employer. Do you know anything about this? Naomi's blood went cold. No, she said quickly. I don't. She ended the call and turned to Julian. He was sitting up now, watching her closely. His expression was tense. It's starting, he said quietly. They're digging how? She asked Camille. He answered bitterly. She must have planted something that day. Within hours, the tabloids exploded. Headlines flashed across gossip sites. Billionaire recluse seduces orphaned maid. Allegations of manipulation. Anonymous sources speculating about her past. Photos appeared online, grainy shots of her at the estate. People she didn't know were suddenly commenting on her life. Julian's legal team scrambled to pull articles down, but the damage was already done. Reporters began circling the edge of the property. Drones buzzed overhead. Naomi stopped leaving the estate altogether. One night, she stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Maybe I should leave, she said quietly. If I go, this dies down. If you leave, Julian said, stepping closer, I fall apart. You were fine before me, she said, her voice breaking. No, he said firmly. I was frozen before you, now I burn. And I'd rather burn with you than freeze alone again. This is hurting you, she said. No, he answered. It's hurting us, and that's worse. Tears stung her eyes. I don't want to be your weakness. He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. His voice was low, steady. You're not my weakness, you're my heart. She broke then, sobbing quietly as he held her. That night, they made love again. Not with urgency, but with something deeper, something that felt like a desperate attempt to memorize each other in case something tore them apart. And in the quiet darkness, he said it. I love you, Naomi. She froze for a moment. Say it again, I love you, her breath caught. I've never heard those words, not like this. Now you have, he said. She pressed her face to his chest. Then I'll stay, no matter what happens. Good, he said softly, because I'll never let you go. For a few days, they lived in a fragile peace, a bubble of warmth in the middle of the storm. But the world outside didn't stop watching. The headlines kept coming. The photos became more invasive. One morning, a drone hovered so close to the kitchen window that Naomi dropped a glass in surprise. Julian stormed outside, grabbed a baseball bat, and smashed it to the ground. His voice roared through the cold air, but anger couldn't fix this. His legal team issued statements. He threatened lawsuits. But the media didn't care about truth. Cared about the spectacle, the billionaire who seduced the maid, the orphan girl who bewitched a king. One night, Naomi found him in the library. He was sitting in his chair, staring at the fire with no book in hand. His face was shadowed by something heavy. We need to talk, he said quietly. Her chest tightened. What is it? They're contacting the board of my company, trying to paint you as leverage. If they find something they can twist, I could lose control of Harrington Capital. Her stomach dropped. What are you saying? They want you gone, he said. Just until this passes. If you leave Cedar Ridge, I can contain this. When it's over, I'll come find you. Her voice cracked. You want me to hide? Want to protect you? No, she said, tears brimming in her eyes. You want to protect your company. That's not fair. His voice was tight. This world is cruel. It chews people up and spits them out. I'm not going to let them do that to you. You're letting them win, she whispered. He stood abruptly, pacing. You think I want this? You think it doesn't kill me to even suggest it? Then don't, she said. You don't understand what's at stake, and you don't understand what it feels like to finally matter to someone and then be told to vanish, she said, her voice breaking. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Naomi's tears slipped down her cheeks. "I thought you saw me," she said softly. "I do." "No," she whispered. "You saw a problem, and now you're trying to erase it." She turned and walked out. He didn't follow. The next morning, she packed a single bag. She left a note on the nightstand, not to guilt him, just to let him go. She took the bus back to Fairview. The shelter's director took one look at her face and didn't ask questions. Days passed, then a week. Naomi kept busy, helping with the children, scrubbing floors, telling herself she was fine. But every night, when she closed her eyes, she saw him. Not cold, not guarded. Just broken. One afternoon, Naomi walked into the break room at the shelter and turned on the TV. She wasn't even paying attention until the volume caught her ear. A news anchor's voice filled the room. "We go live now to Julian Harrington, CEO of Harrington Capital, holding a press conference outside his Manhattan office." The camera cut to Julian, standing at a podium. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was immaculate. His expression was calm, but Naomi saw it. Immediately, the pain just beneath the surface. He adjusted the microphone. "I want to make one thing clear," he began. "Naomi Brooks did not manipulate me. She didn't seduce me. She didn't take anything from me. I gave it freely. My time, my heart, my name, if she have it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions. He raised his hand. "This company was built on my vision. But I lost sight of what mattered. I let fear drive me. And I lost the woman who taught me how to feel again." Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. The remote slipped from her fingers. Her knees gave out beneath her, and she dropped into the nearest chair, breathless. That night, a black car pulled up outside the shelter. It stopped in front of the steps. The door opened, and Julian stepped out, coat flaring in the wind. Naomi was already standing there. They didn't say anything at first. They just looked at each other like the entire world had gone silent. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small gold ring. No box, no speech, just a ring. And a man who looked terrified. "Marry me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not for the press, not to fix anything, just because I love you." Naomi stared at him, her heart breaking open. "You sent me away, and I came back," he said. "Because I realized this empire means nothing without you in it. Don't owe me anything, I know that, but I owe myself the truth. And the truth is I can't do this life without you." She took the ring. There was no hesitation, no fear. "Then don't," she said. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was air and warmth and everything he'd been missing. And for once, there was no scandal, no cameras, just the two of them, two souls, who had burned and frozen, and now finally found their way home. The wedding was not grand. There were no flashing lights or tabloid cameras, no towering cakes or celebrity guests. Just a quiet ceremony in the snowy woods behind the Harrington estate. The children from the shelter stood in place of bridesmaids and groomsmen. Their faces glowed with wonder. The wind whispered through the trees like a blessing. Naomi wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself. The fabric was soft, unpretentious, and beautiful. Julian wore a black suit with no tie. His hand never left hers. When the officiant asked for vows, Julian didn't hesitate. "You walked into my life during the coldest season," he said. "And somehow, you made me feel again. I told you I didn't need a maid. The truth is, I didn't think I needed anyone. But now I know I don't want to live a single day without your voice, your strength, your light." Naomi's voice trembled as she looked up at him. "You scared me," she said. "Not because of who you were, but because of how deeply I felt drawn to you. I thought I was too invisible to be loved. You proved me wrong. I thought you were too far gone to feel. I proved you wrong. That's what we do, we save each other." They kissed. Not as billionaire and maid. Not as broken and hopeful. But as to people who had clawed their way out of loneliness and chosen each other. Afterward, they danced barefoot in the snow. No music, Just the crunch of fresh snow, the sound of laughter, and the rhythm of their hearts. Inside the estate, the fireplaces burned warmer than ever. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and sweet tea. The piano in the music room wasn't just for show anymore. Julian started playing a few notes every morning just to hear Naomi laugh, and she laughed often now, boldly, loudly, like someone who had finally found her place in the world. He no longer called her just Naomi, he called her his fire, his warmth, his home. And she no longer called him the Ice King. He was simply Julian, the man who once lived behind stone walls and silence, now softening every day beside the woman who reminded him how to feel again. The scandal faded. The reporters moved on. But they stayed, building something not from wealth or fear, but from truth. From the hard, beautiful work of love, because sometimes, the most powerful kind of love isn't the one that shouts the loudest, it's the one that survives the silence. And in the end, it was never about needing a maid, it was about needing a mirror. Someone who reflected who you weren't, who you could become together.